We're going to jump all over the place here with the timeline, but because you brought up stare downs and stuff, when you had the fight with Chuck Liddell, you were a heavy underdog.
Yeah.
What do you remember from that stare down? Do you remember feeling like, oh, I've got an edge here?
I remember that's when it got real to me, right? Like, during training camp, everybody was like, oh man, you got to fight Chuck. And I'm like, yeah. And then they'll be like, okay, kind of give me that look like, sorry for your loss. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Like, it was kind of like already a foregone conclusion. So when I got to the weigh-in and we did the face-off, that's when I really started to think man, I'm fighting Chuck Liddell. So that's when, for me, the nerve started. Like for me, I was like, oh man, Chuck's looks serious, because I watched him so many times fight, Tito Ortiz and Randy Couture and both of those guys at the time. I was like, those were like big idols to me, So when I'm watching him stare at me, I'm like, oh man, he's giving me that look like he gave, Randy Couture, So it was real. That's when it became real for me.
Did you feel like when you were looking at him either in the stare down or from across the cage that you were going to win?
Yeah, I felt as if like I was going to be free. I felt I was going to be free. And that stems from the night before. I was nervous from the weigh-in, the stare down. And after my family left, after we had our little, like our Last Supper deal, right? Because all my family comes into town, then we have what is equal to the Last Supper. And I kind of give them hugs and kisses and kind of alleviate their worst fears. But even though still realizing them myself, right? Like, oh, I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I'm just making them feel better.
Yeah.
So after they left, I'm just like, I'm left with this feeling in my stomach. And I'm like, oh man, I feel like I'm sick. I don't know if I can do this. And then I hit up Randy Couture, who just happened to be a floor below me. And I go and see Randy and I'm like, Randy, I knock on the door and he's like, hey, what's going on? I'm like, oh man, Randy, I'm scared, man. I'm scared. And Randy's like, what's going on? He's like, oh man, I just can't shake this feeling, man. I'm just so nervous about tomorrow. And, I don't want to get beat up and knocked out in front of everybody. And, and he said, the best advice I ever got. And he said, you got to make friends with the worst enemy. And when you make friends with the worst enemy, you understand that life will go on. The sun is still going to rise, your family's still going to be there, and you're going to get another opportunity to fight no matter what this yields. So once I started to really think about what he said, because after I left him, I kind of felt a little bit better, but then I had to meditate on a thought. And then I worked myself up into a lather just thinking about it like, yeah, I got to face my fears. I got to face my worst enemy, and I got to face my, whatever I'm afraid to happen. And then I became so comfortable with the idea that I may be getting embarrassed tomorrow. I was like, whatever is whatever. So I went out there feeling free.
I remember Tito Ortiz saying, when you're prepared for the worst, the best always happens because
Absolutely.
You're prepared for the worst to happen.
Yeah.
Things happen so fast during a fight. Do you remember seeing that opening in that Chuck fight?
I remember, so in that fight, he kept hitting me with like his right hand. His right hand is crazy because usually when you're fighting somebody, I can tell what punch you're gonna throw or likely to throw just based on how your shoulder opens up when you're getting ready to swing, right? So I couldn't really tell what Chuck was throwing because it all kind of looked the same. It was either gonna be a shovel uppercut or a hook, or it can be a straight. So in baseball, he had like a changeup, right? But it's a changeup on the punch. So I couldn't tell which punch that he was going to throw with his right hand. But I knew his right hand was coming. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to beat him to the punch. So whenever he throws, I'm going to throw. And it's called throw on throw. When you throw, I'm going to throw at the same time.
Yeah.
And I just threw at the same time with the right hand, but I was really trying to catch him with the left hook because I didn't want him to hit me with that right hand. And I felt like if I go like this, then I'll be okay if he comes back with the right hand. And I caught him with the right hand, and I was like, whoa. It was crazy.
And he didn't get up.
No, it was crazy. It was such a flush shot. And I remember throwing that punch, and then I remember looking, and he's falling away from my vision. And I'm like, he couldn't have fell. I'm thinking that in the middle, because like time slows down. Like when you're in a mindset, when you're fighting, your senses become melted. Like they just kind of, you become so present that all your senses kind of like melt together a little bit, you know? So one of the things that happens is like when you're in the present, it's like the car accident effect, like life just kind of slows down, right?
Mm.
And that's how it was when I was throwing that punch. It kind of like slowed down. I'm like, man, he went down, and then it took forever to come out of that hook. And then finally it came out of the hook and I seen that he was on the ground. I was like, oh my gosh,
Oh
what?
man.